Hello everybody, this is the Wikstrand. One of the most monumental moments in humanity's history is probably when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in 1969. It was such an epic occasion. It was such a grand, vast and impressive feat of engineering and science and stuff like that, that I'm surprised that it's taken Hollywood this long to actually make a movie about Neil Armstrong and the moon landing. Which makes me question a little bit my sanity, because when this movie came out it was universally praised. Everybody was saying that this is one of the greatest movies of all time. It's one of the greatest performances of all time. Ryan Gosling was absolutely fantastic in this movie. It was such an experience to see this movie, because this movie was such a fantastic movie from not just an historical perspective, but also from a visual perspective. I was sitting there, I was watching this movie, and there was a point after 25 minutes when I thought, have I accidentally got some kind of a pirate copy of this one? A much lesser version of this, because this feels low rent as hell. This is Bush League, I thought. Let's see if we can find out why this movie was absolutely not for me. I can think of a couple of reasons, but we're gonna discuss the major ones. This is First Man. Tells the story, of course, about how Neil Armstrong entered the space program and how he eventually would land on the moon. We are also told the passage of time through newsreels and events that is happening throughout the United States and the world. My opinion is that I think this was going to be a much better movie if they could have focused more on the politics behind the space program and going to the moon and stuff like that, and they didn't. And instead we had a lot of, him doubting himself and him, having, family problems and stuff like that. And it was just so boring. And I didn't know it was possible to make such an occasion as the moon landing so boring, because it feels like this movie absolutely slogs on. The sluggish pace in this movie made me really, really, really impatient right from the get-go. But turns out it was going to get even worse, because there is another thing that this movie has that hamstrung this movie in a monumental way. What was that, you ask? Well, this movie looked awful. People are standing in the shadows, people are covered by smoke, there are dark rooms, and everything looks low rent and Bush League. If this was an artistic choice, then you, Damien Chazelle, is an absolute lunatic, because you made your $100 million movie look like, for the most part, like a $100 movie. It was fucking awful and it looked so boring. I don't know how to make the 60s, the space program and Neil Armstrong look dull, boring and uninteresting. I was just, oh god, this is bad. But the things didn't stop quite there, did it? No, because we have Ryan Gosling pissing yet on another great movie by being horrendously miscasted. Drive, Blade Runner 2049, fantastic casting decisions. This one, oh boy, this was not very good. Now, I don't know what Neil Armstrong was as a person, but he could not have been this boring and this dull. It's impossible. You don't care about anything that happens to him. You don't care that he's gonna go to the moon. You don't care what happens to him. And all the small little side plots we're having with him with his family, it feels like he never cares about anything. It seems like the most boring, most mundane and most uninteresting person in the history of time. And if that was the case, bravo, you can still make a character like that interesting. You can still make a character that is emotionless interesting, because that is the thing that Ryan Gosling is very, very good at, and that is being emotionally detached. Sometimes that attachment can lead to absolute comedy. See also The Nice Guys, which I actually forgot before remembering it. But nevertheless, for the most part, this movie is boring, it is ugly looking, it is dull, and I didn't care a single bit about it. Now, the sequences on the moon did actually look quite nice, actually. They looked really good. But if you had a vision that could make a movie look as good as it did on the moon, wasn't fantastic, but it was better than the rest. Why didn't you make the rest of the movie look as impressive as this part of the movie? I'm imagining that the reason for this being that they wanted to separate the Earth setting from the moon setting. But if that is the case, why couldn't the moon have been a bigger part of the movie? Because I was so bored and I was so disinterested when we got to the moon that I really didn't care. The movie also had a dreadful soundtrack. Usually the space program and astronauts and astronauts in peril, or the space program and stuff like that, is usually something that is very exciting when you're depicting it on screen. But this one just made it look very boring, very mundane, and very, very dull. And maybe that was the case, but you don't have to show that. Pretend a little bit. Not everything has to be this boring and mundane. Comparing this one to movies like Marooned and Apollo 13 and some stuff like that, just made me realize how much more impressive those movies look than this one. This looks like a small TV movie that somehow has been called one of the greatest movies from a artistic storytelling point that I've ever seen. Gravity, for Christ's sake. Nothing has ever looked so impressive when it comes to space settings such as Gravity. This movie, not so much. Do I recommend this movie? No, I do not. There are good actors in this one. Claire Foy is good, Jason Clarke is good, but I never really cared about what's going to happen, and I was never really that engaged in the whole thing. And that shouldn't be the case when you're having one of the most impressive feats of human engineering and science put to the film. In this case, the moon landing. But they somehow managed to find a way to make even this thing look a bit dull. First Man lacks the ambition to really put the scope to what the moon landing should be. I can only give this movie 33 points. It is a dull, uninteresting, and pretty lazily made movie that is miscasted, but there are bits and pieces of it that was really impressive and looked really good. But those sequences are few and far in between and are mostly, taking place on the moon. The rest of the movie looks really, really, really dull, and this movie was really boring. I didn't really care about anything that happened in this movie. It was a very long chore just to get to those moon sequences that was good, but not too impressive. So I'll see you next time for, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.